The candles at the center of the dining table were lit before I arrived. 12 of them, in 2 silver candelabras belonging to the Cresthollow family for 3 generations. I know this because Mimi Cresthollow told me so on the first evening I came to this house, back when he still looked at me as though I mattered. That was before Adrian died. My name is Mimi Cresthollow. I married into this family 4 years ago, and for 2 of those years I have been trying, quietly, carefully, to remain part of it. Not for the money. Not for the title, but because Adrian asked me to protect what he loved. Because he believed I belonged here. The dinner had been called to discuss the spring arrangements for the estate's charitable foundation. I dressed carefully. I arrived on time. I took the seat that had always been mine, third from the head of the table, and waited. Jeffrey raised his glass and named every person at the table. Rupert. Cordelia. Young William. Even Mrs. Ashby, the solicitor's assistant, invited purely as a courtesy. He did not say my name. If this story has you gripped already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. There is so much more to come. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from right now? Because just as I steadied my glass and prepared to speak, I heard Rupert murmur to Cordelia, "She won't be here much longer anyway." The evening carried on as though I had not heard a single word. The following morning, Jeffrey summoned me to his study before breakfast. He was already seated when I arrived, his reading glasses low on his nose and a manila folder open before him. He did not invite me to sit. He told me, in the tone he used for matters already decided, that the estate required someone to manage its operational side. Logistics. Correspondence. The scheduling of groundsmen and the coordination of external contractors. Until the foundation accounts were properly settled, he said, it made sense for me to handle it. He used the word temporarily twice. I asked what had prompted this decision. He told me there had been concerns about efficiency. I asked who had raised those concerns. He removed his glasses and folded them with deliberate care. The family, he said. Collectively. Within 3 days I was buried in paperwork. Supplier invoices. Maintenance rotas. Catering schedules for events nobody mentioned until the morning they were due. I organized all of it without a word of complaint. But something else was happening alongside the busyness. On the 4th day I went to retrieve the quarterly foundation ledger from the filing cabinet in the east corridor. It was gone. I asked Mrs. Penhaligon, the office administrator, who told me those files had been reclassified. Access was now restricted to senior family members only. I was no longer considered senior. I walked back to my desk and sat very still for a long moment. The estate hummed around me, busy, purposeful, and entirely indifferent to my presence. It was a Tuesday when the accounting error surfaced. I remember because I had spent the entire morning driving to the village to collect documents from the solicitor's office, papers Jeffrey had requested urgently, in person, on paper. When I returned, Mrs. Penhaligon met me in the corridor with an expression I could not immediately read. The foundation's supplier ledger showed an overpayment to a landscaping firm. £12,000, processed without authorization. The payment record carried a reference code matching my administrative login. My name appeared at the top of the approval column. I had not approved any such payment. I had not had access to that ledger since the files were reclassified the previous week. I said this plainly to Jeffrey that afternoon. He listened with folded hands and an unreadable face. When I finished, he nodded slowly, as though I had said something requiring careful thought. Then Rupert spoke from the chair beside Jeffrey. He had not been invited to that meeting, or perhaps he had, and I simply had not been told. Given everything, he said, without looking at me, perhaps we should begin formally documenting Mimi's behavior. Jeffrey did not disagree. I drove back to my quarters that evening with a cold, hollow feeling settling in my chest. Someone had used my name to sign off a payment I had not made. Someone had planned this deliberately. And the family's first response had not been to question the error. It had been to question me. The instruction arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped beneath my office door in a sealed envelope. It was typed rather than handwritten and bore the Cresthollow family crest at the top right corner. Beginning immediately, all estate contractors and visiting associates would use the main entrance on the south side of the house. To avoid confusion during visits, I was asked to use the side entrance, beside the old utility rooms off the walled courtyard. There was no explanation beyond that. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in my jacket pocket, where I kept things I did not want to lose. I used the side entrance the following morning. I passed the laundry room, the boiler alcove, and the rack of outdoor coats belonging to the groundsmen. Harold, who had worked at Cresthollow for over 30 years, was filling a bucket at the utility sink when I came through. He glanced at me, then away, then back. "You know you don't have to use this entrance," he said. I told him I had been asked to. He turned off the tap slowly. "Be careful, Mrs. Cresthollow," he said quietly. "You're being positioned, if you'll forgive me saying so. Pay close attention to who has been signing things in your name." He picked up the bucket and walked out without waiting for my response. I stood in the utility corridor for a long moment. I did not dismiss what he had said. Every word of it settled into me like something I had already known and simply needed someone else to confirm. I had been told the private study on the first floor was locked for renovation. The door was always shut. A printed notice had appeared on it reading, "Works in progress. Please do not enter." I had accepted this without question. There was always too much else demanding attention, and closed doors had seemed unimportant. But on a Thursday night, unable to sleep, I came downstairs for water and noticed a light beneath that door. A thin strip of pale gold, barely visible unless you were standing at exactly the right angle in the darkened corridor. I stood still. Then the light went out and the door opened. Cordelia stepped into the corridor. She was dressed not in nightclothes but in a dark blouse and tailored trousers, as though she had been sitting somewhere, working. She did not see me immediately. When she did, she paused for barely a fraction of a second before settling into something warm and unhurried. "Mimi," she said softly. I couldn't sleep either. Dreadful habit, isn't it? She walked past me towards the staircase and ascended without any trace of hurry. I stood outside the study door for several minutes. Then I tried the handle. It opened. On the mahogany desk inside lay a spread of documents. Several bore headers I recognized, the foundation's letterhead, the estate accounts template, and at the bottom of one approval column, in clean typed print, was my name. I had not set foot in that room in 3 months. Mrs. Penhaligon was not easy to approach. She was efficient, reserved, and loyal in the way long-serving staff often are, not to any person, but to the order of the house. I had never asked her for anything beyond what was strictly necessary. But the morning after I found those documents, I waited until the east corridor was empty, then knocked on her open door and asked quietly if I might speak with her. She studied me for a long time before she nodded. I did not tell her everything. I said only that I had noticed inconsistencies, documents appearing to have been amended after office hours, and that I was trying to understand the pattern. She was silent. Then she folded her hands on the desk. "I've noticed it too," she said. "Files are pulled from the physical archive and returned, sometimes with updated reference codes. It happens in the evening, after the rest of us have gone." I asked whether the changes followed any particular pattern, whether specific dates were involved. She opened a drawer and produced a small, dark blue notebook. She did not hand it to me. She laid it open on the desk so that I could read it. Every entry was dated. Every entry recorded a file reference and a time. And every single date, as I read slowly down the page, matched a day when I had been sent away from the estate on an errand that now seemed far less urgent than it had appeared at the time. I looked up at her. She closed the notebook without a word. I heard the conversation by accident. That is the truest way I can describe it. I had gone to return keys to the hook board near the east corridor sitting room. The door had been pulled almost shut, not completely. The voices inside were low and deliberate. Geoffrey's first, measured as always. Then Rupert's, with that particular edge he used when a matter had already been decided. I stopped where I was. I did not move. The solicitor says the inheritance clause is watertight, Rupert said. She has legal standing as long as she holds her current role within the foundation. Jeffrey replied, then the role has to go first. A pause. The reputation alongside it, Rupert continued. If there is a formal record of incompetence, documented errors, financial irregularities under her authority, the board can act without any legal challenge from her side. Another pause. Longer. Make it look like incompetence, Rupert said. Not intention. I pressed myself flat against the wall. My heart was knocking so hard I was certain they would hear it through the plaster. They carried on, something about a timeline, something about external partners before the end of the quarter, but I could not absorb any more details. The words already spoken were enough. They were not trying to embarrass me. They were not easing me out quietly. They were building a case, formal, documented, and deliberate, designed to remove me from this family completely. I stood in that corridor until I was certain I could walk away without shaking. The contract collapse happened on a Friday. I know because I had spent the previous Thursday evening reviewing every detail of the Harwick construction agreement, the estate's largest project that year, a new drainage system for the lower grounds. I had checked the delivery schedule, confirmed the payment terms, and sent the signed copy to the project manager before 9 o'clock. By Friday morning, the project manager was on the phone to Jeffrey. The contract was void. The copy he had received differed materially from the version the family solicitor held. Key clauses had been altered, liability terms, milestone payments, the completion guarantee. The version bearing my signature had been changed after I sent it. Jeffrey called me into his study before lunch. He placed 2 documents on the desk side by side and said nothing. He simply waited. I looked at both carefully. The version I had sent was gone. What remained was a corrupted document that placed the estate in a costly position and made me appear either reckless or dishonest. I told Jeffrey precisely what I had done the previous evening, the timestamps, the project manager's confirmation, the original still saved in my correspondence folder. He listened with complete courtesy. Then he said, Mimi, this is the second serious matter in a matter of weeks. The evidence against me was almost perfectly constructed. That was the detail that frightened me most, not the damage it might cause, but how deliberate it was. It was not careless. It was not rushed. It was exact. I stopped sleeping properly after that Friday. Not from fear alone, though fear was there. My mind would not settle because it kept circling back to the timestamps, the dates, the pattern that Mrs. Penhaligon's notebook had suggested. I needed to see it whole. I spent 3 evenings working through everything I could still access. My own email records. The estate's internal scheduling calendar. The errand logs assigned to me over the preceding 8 weeks. The picture that emerged was deliberate. Every error under my name, the overpayment, the contract corruption, and a third discrepancy I had not yet been able to raise, had occurred within the same narrow window. Between 6 and 9 o'clock in the evening. Always on a day when I had been sent away from the estate on a task assigned by someone else. The supplier payment was processed while I collected papers from the solicitor's office. The contract amendment occurred the evening of the Barwick Village community meeting, a meeting I had not asked to attend. Each time, I had been removed from the house deliberately. The estate server's access logs, which I could still view, because nobody had thought to restrict that specific permission, showed activity from a senior family account during every one of those windows. I printed the logs and placed them inside a brown envelope at the back of my wardrobe drawer. Then I sat very still on the edge of my bed and began, for the first time, to think carefully about what I was going to do with what I now knew. I had been looking at Rupert. From the very beginning, that had seemed the obvious direction. He spoke over me at dinner. He suggested documenting my behavior. He carried himself with the untroubled confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted without resistance. Everything about him seemed to point inward, towards guilt, so when the access logs pointed somewhere else entirely, I sat with the information for a long time before I let myself accept it. The senior family account used to access and amend those files, during every narrow window, on every occasion I had been conveniently removed from the estate, did not belong to Rupert. It belonged to Cordelia. Cordelia, who always spoke carefully in meetings. Who had never raised her voice at me. Who had never cut me off or regarded me with anything other than patient, measured concern. Cordelia, who had told Geoffrey, in the weeks after Adrian died, that the family ought to give Mimi time. That the estate should feel like a home to her. Cordelia, who I had occasionally, in my darkest moments, thought of as the only person in this house who genuinely saw me. I looked at her account name on the printed log for a long time and did not look away. The realization did not arrive with heat or fury. It came quietly, in the way the worst truths often do, settling into the chest slowly, making the air feel just slightly thinner than it had been the moment before. I needed to be certain. A suspicion, however well supported, was not enough, not in a house where documents were altered overnight. I needed proof built entirely on my own terms. I chose a document that would be credible to amend. An internal memo regarding contractor scheduling for the East Wing restoration, the kind of administrative paper that passed across desks without much notice. I placed it in the shared filing system with a deliberate error, a cost figure slightly too high, the sort of thing that someone watching carefully might choose to correct in order to shift responsibility, but before uploading it, I embedded 3 specific details I told nobody about. A reference number I had invented. A contractor name that did not exist anywhere in the estate's records. A date formatted in a way I had never used before and had no reason to use. Then I waited. 3 days later, I retrieved the document. It had been amended. The cost figure had been adjusted, downward, plausibly. But the 3 markers I had hidden were still there, untouched. Whoever altered it had done so quickly, without reading carefully enough to notice what I had concealed inside. The access log showed the amendment had been made at 7:42 in the evening on a Wednesday. The day I had been asked to drive to the surveyor's office in Barwick to collect boundary plans on behalf of the estate. I sat on the edge of my bed and read the log 4 times. The trap had worked exactly as planned. I needed to understand why. The what was now established, the altered documents, the forged approvals, the precise timing. But the motive had not been fully visible to me until I looked in a different direction. I still had access to a portion of the Foundation's historical financial records, enough to trace the movement of certain funds across the past 2 years. I spent a Saturday afternoon going through them carefully, and what I found changed the quality of everything. The Cresthollow family, to outward appearances, was in good standing. The estate was large, the charitable work well regarded, and Geoffrey spoke of the Foundation's future with the ease of someone who had never doubted it. But beneath the surface, the picture was considerably darker. There were loans drawn against the estate's assets over the past 18 months. The creditors were not banks but private parties, names I did not recognize at first, though they appeared consistently enough to suggest a deliberate arrangement. The repayment schedule was tight. And if the Foundation's assets were restructured, which required the trustee arrangements to change, the pressure on those loans would ease considerably. I was a trustee. Adrian had named me so, in writing. Removing me would allow the family to restructure without requiring my signature. I then found Cordelia's private financial interests through a company directorship filing on the public register. Her name was tied directly to one of those private lenders. She was not simply trying to remove me. She was trying to save herself. I found Cordelia in the garden on a Sunday morning. She was sitting at the stone table near the yew hedge with a cup of tea and a book, the picture of someone entirely at ease. I sat down across from her without being invited. I placed the printed access log on the table between us, face up. Then I waited. She looked at it, her expression did not change. "I know it was you," I said. "The server logs. The document amendments. The timing of every errand. Everything leads the same way." She set her teacup down with great care and folded her hands in her lap. When she looked up, her face was perfectly composed. "Mimi," she said, "you've been under an enormous amount of strain since Adrian passed. We've all been concerned." I told her I was not discussing strain. I was discussing evidence. She tilted her head slightly. You don't have the standing to accuse me, she said. Not in this family. Not without Adrian. And a printout from an internal system that any senior member could access is not the kind of thing that will move Jeffrey. She picked up her book. I think you may be building a story around coincidence, she said, without looking at me. Grief does extraordinary things to the mind. She turned a page. I sat for one more moment. Then I stood, collected my document, and walked back towards the house. My hands were completely steady. She had made one significant error. She had told me precisely what would not be enough. I did not react. That was the most important decision I made in the days that followed, to give Cordelia nothing to observe, nothing that might prompt her to move sooner than planned. I continued arriving at meals on time. I kept using the side entrance. I submitted my work without complaint. I greeted Jeffrey pleasantly. I asked Rupert once about the drainage project timeline, as though the contract collapse had been a minor inconvenience now resolved. Underneath all of that, I was building something. Mrs. Penhaligon allowed me to photograph every page of her notebook, each date, each file entry, each reference. Harold provided a written account of our utility corridor conversation, signed and dated in his own hand. I retrieved the original Harwick contract from my personal email archive and had it verified by Miss Forsyth, an independent village solicitor, who confirmed in writing the precise discrepancy between the two existing versions. I also continued feeding controlled information into the shared filing system, documents with embedded markers that I could track and prove had been amended without my knowledge. Each time the trap was triggered, I logged the timestamp and saved the evidence to a portable drive kept in my car, not in the house. 3 weeks passed. The file grew steadily. And through every day of those 3 weeks, Cordelia sat at her Sunday table with her tea and her book, composed and patient, waiting for me to collapse. I had no intention of collapsing. The formal review was announced on a Wednesday. I found out through an email addressed to me but written, I felt certain, by someone who had not expected me to remain calm when I read it. The Cresthollow Foundation Board of Governors would convene the following Friday to discuss concerns regarding the management of the estate's administrative functions. My conduct and competence over the preceding quarter were listed as the primary agenda items. I was invited to attend. 2 days before the meeting, Jeffrey invited external partners to dinner, 2 men from the investment firm holding one of the foundation's major grant agreements. They were courteous and professional. Over the main course, Rupert managed, with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it carefully, to raise the issue of recent administrative irregularities at Cresthollow. He mentioned the overpayment. He mentioned the Harwick contract. He did not name me directly, he referred, with quiet regret, to difficulties arising under the current arrangement. One of the visiting partners glanced briefly at me. I smiled and reached for my water glass. Across the table, Cordelia looked at me with an expression I could only describe as quiet pity, worn by someone who believes the person opposite them is about to be undone and has not yet understood it. That look told me everything about how confident she was. After dinner I excused myself early. I sat at my desk and went through the folder on my drive one final time, every timestamp, every marker, every signed statement. Nothing was missing. I was ready. The board meeting was held in the estate's main reception room, long Georgian windows, and the portrait of Jeffrey's father hanging above the fireplace. 8 people sat around the oval table, Jeffrey at the head, Rupert to his right, Cordelia 2 seats further along, 3 external board governors, the estate's legal representative, and myself. I had been given a seat at the far end of the table. The agenda was distributed. My name appeared at the top of the second page beneath the heading, Review of Administrative Conduct, Mimi Cresthollow. Jeffrey opened the meeting with a prepared statement. He spoke about the foundation's reputation, about fiduciary responsibility, and about the importance of maintaining public confidence. He was careful not to say my name during any part of this address. Rupert followed. He presented a 3-page summary printed on the foundation's letterhead, the accounting overpayment, the Harwick contract failure, and 2 additional irregularities I had not been formally told about until that very moment. As I read those additional items quickly, I recognized them both. They were documents I had placed into the shared filing system with embedded markers over the preceding 3 weeks. Both had been amended after hours. Both had been logged. Both were already inside my folder. Rupert concluded by recommending a formal capability process be initiated without delay. The external governors made careful notes. Cordelia sat quietly watching me with that patient, sorrowful expression, the one I now understood with complete clarity. I folded my hands on the table and waited for the right moment. I let them finish. That was the part one had rehearsed most carefully, sitting still while the case against me was built, piece by piece, in front of people who had no reason yet to doubt what they were hearing. Every instinct I had told me to interrupt, to correct, to defend myself. I did none of those things. When Rupert concluded and the room fell quiet, Jeffrey looked at me and said, with reasonable courtesy, that I was welcome to respond. I thanked the board for their time. I said I understood the gravity of the concerns raised. I said that I had, over the preceding weeks, become aware of certain irregularities myself, and that I had prepared documentation the board would find relevant. I opened the folder I had brought. I did not present it dramatically. I placed a copy in front of each person seated around the table, quietly and methodically, exactly as you might distribute an agenda. The external governors began reading before I had returned to my seat. Inside each folder, the server access logs, cross-referenced with every date I had been sent away from the estate. Mrs. Penhaligon's photographed notebook entries, each one dated. Harold signed and witnessed account. Miss Forsyth's legal confirmation of the original Harwick contract. And the embedded marker documents, each one accompanied by a clear record of when it was accessed, from which account, and precisely what had been changed. I sat down. I looked at no one in particular. The room was entirely silent. The external governors were the first to move. The white-haired man at Jeffrey's left, Mr. Caldwell, 11 years on the board, leaned forward and began reading more carefully. After a moment, he asked me to explain how the server access logs were structured. I described, clearly and without emotion, how the estate's internal system recorded every access event, the account name, the timestamp, and the document reference. I explained that the account appearing consistently across every amended file was not mine. Mr. Caldwell looked at Jeffrey. Jeffrey had gone very still. Rupert shifted in his chair. Miss Avery, the second external governor, who had not spoken once during Rupert's presentation, asked whether the account shown in the logs could be verified against a named user. I told her it could. The account name was printed clearly at the top right corner of every log page in the folder. I watched the moment register across the room. Mr. Caldwell read the name. He set the paper down. He looked to his left, along the length of the table, towards Cordelia. She did not look back at him. She was looking at the window. Cordelia, Jeffrey said. One word only. She turned to face him slowly. Her composure did not shatter. Cordelia was not someone whose composure shattered. But it slipped, in the way a mask slips when the person beneath it becomes, for just a moment, too exhausted to hold it in place. I believe, she said very quietly, that this requires proper legal consideration. The room shifted entirely. Nothing more needed to be said. Jeffrey adjourned the meeting for 20 minutes. When it resumed, the atmosphere had changed completely. The external governors asked Cordelia to withdraw while they considered the evidence. She stood without a word. As she passed my chair, she did not look at me. She walked to the door with perfect posture and pulled it shut behind her without a sound. The governors deliberated for 8 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above the fireplace and did not look away once. Mr. Caldwell spoke first. He said the documentation was sufficiently detailed and independently verified to constitute a serious matter requiring immediate referral to the Foundation's legal advisors. He stated that all decisions made under the contested administrative arrangement should be suspended pending full review. He noted that my position as trustee, which had never been formally revoked, only gradually and improperly undermined, remained entirely intact. Jeffrey did not look at Rupert during any of this. Rupert stared at the table's surface. After the meeting formally closed and the governors gathered their papers, Jeffrey crossed the room to where I stood. He looked older than he had an hour ago, not in his face, but in his eyes, in the particular way a person looks when they understand they have made a serious mistake. "I should have asked more questions," he said. I did not tell him it was all right, because it was not. But I nodded once and allowed that to be enough. Outside the window, the estate grounds stretched wide and quiet and green. They had always been there. They still were. I did not stay in the same role. That was never going to be possible, not because the family would have forced me out, but because I understood something I had not understood before walking into that meeting room. The version of myself who had come in through the side entrance, eaten in silence, and waited for someone to acknowledge her name, she was gone. She had done what was required. But she was not who I was going to be from this point forward. I spoke to Jeffrey the following week. I told him I would remain a trustee, that was not open for discussion, and it was precisely what Adrian had intended, but that I would no longer manage administrative work from inside the estate. I would hold a formal role with my own independent legal counsel. He agreed to every condition. Cordelia resigned from the board before the legal review concluded. Her solicitor's letter cited personal reasons. Her financial connections to the estate's private lenders were referred to the governors for examination. The estate's arrangements began, slowly, to be untangled. Mrs. Penhaligon sent me a card with 2 quiet lines written inside. Harold nodded at me across the courtyard one morning, a single steady nod that said more than most speeches could. As I drove through the main gate on the day my new arrangement was signed, I was told that Jeffrey had said to Rupert very quietly, "We underestimated the wrong person." I smiled when I heard it. I had already known. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because more stories just like this one are on the way.